Night in the Frostfangs rode the mountain like a white wolf, all teeth and hunger. The wind went keen along the cliffs and scoured the hollows clean of sound, and every breath Jon drew felt scraped across iron. Snow drifted sideways under a sky full of slow, ice-pale stars. Ghost moved ahead of him without the slightest whisper, a pale shape among paler stones, vanishing and reappearing as if he were the thought of a wolf more than the beast himself. Jon kept one gauntlet hand on the worn leather of Longclaw's grip and the other on the frozen lip of a ledge slick with rime. Below, the ravine fell away into darkness. Above, the half-hand's small fire was a tight orange bead behind a low spill of rock, shielded from the wind. The old ranger had sent him to scout the broken ground ahead, while the others made ready to move before dawn. It was not yet dawn. It would never be dawn in the Frostfangs, Jon thought. The mountains would eat every bit of day before it had the chance to warm a man's fingers. Ghost stopped and turned his head, blind eyes burning red in the starlight. He had that stillness that meant he had scented something hidden, something patient, something that did not run. Jon felt it, too, the way he sometimes felt Ghost's belly tighten before the leap, or the way his own skin prickled before snow slid off the trees in a sudden whispered rush. A hair-thin shiver of air came up out of the crack at their feet, not warmer, but different. Alive. "What is it?" he breathed, and caught himself. Talking to a wolf made you a fool to other men. But here there were no other men but Corin, Stone Snake, and Eben and the mountain. He eased down to one knee and felt along the edge of the fissure. It was no more than the width of 2 fingers for the most part, but where a squat boulder leaned against a dead white trunk, there was a wider place. He wormed his hand in and felt frost-limbed stone, slick as glass. Deeper, his glove brushed leather-hard ridges. The thing under his hand was smooth in places and rough in others, like river-worn stone with veins raised upon it. A faint thrumming came through the leather into his palm, no stronger than a kitten's purr, regular as a heartbeat, and it startled him, so he jerked back and flaked frost into the air. Ghost did not startle. He sank to his belly and thrust his muzzle into the crack, drawing in breath in long, deliberate drafts. Then he looked up at Jon again and sneezed, as if the cold had bit the inside of his nose. Jon should have gone back to the half-hand. He knew that with the same iron certainty with which he had known his father would look at him and see a son even while others saw a bastard. But the pulse beneath the rock tugged at him, and the tug felt no less his own than the way Ghost's hackles lifted when the wrong smell lay on a trail. He stripped off his glove, bit the cold, and slid bare fingers into the fissure, breathing careful so his breath would not cloud his sight. The thing had weight when he got his hands around it, more than he'd expected, and for a heartbeat he thought it would not fit and he would shame himself with the effort. Then the ice around it cracked with a delicate music and the ridged stone slid forward. Jon cradled it with both hands and eased it free. It was not a stone, not truly. It had the shape of a goose egg, yet bigger, the size of a helmet bowl, and its shell was white with a sheen like wet snow. Faint traceries of blue ran through it in patterns that caught the starlight and returned it as a dim, inner glow. Its surface was cold enough to burn. The heartbeat he had felt through his glove was clearer now in his bare hands, though it was slow, so slow one might have thought it a trick of the blood. Ghost's muzzle pressed against the egg, and the direwolf's breath fogged the shell. The purr did not change. Jon wrapped it in his cloak and bore it to the shadow where the wind had less teeth. His fingers felt frostbitten when he pulled the glove back on, and they sang with pain as the blood returned. He held the bundle to his chest and listened to the cold thrum and felt at once like a boy stealing a pie from the kitchens and a man standing on the edge of a cliff, choosing. He turned and went back to the half-hand. Corin's profile, backlit by the killing quiet fire, looked carved from the same stone that held up the mountain. He did not start when Jon came out of the dark. He did not say, "What have you there?" the way a lesser man would have. He looked at Jon as if he could see through cloak and bone, and said only, "Well, ridges ahead, a fall if we stray to the east. There's a spine of rock we can follow down come light." Jon swallowed, his mouth furry with cold. "I found something in the crack of a rock." "What sort of something?" Stone Snake asked. He had a face like a root dug from hard ground, all knobs and tight skin, and he never wasted words. "An egg," John said, and his own voice felt like a lie even as he told it. He set the bundle down by the fire, careful as you set a babe, and opened the cloak. Firelight laid itself across the shell. Blue veins woke and gleamed, not bright but present, veins of light in the white. Eben leaned forward slow as if he feared startling it. "By the mother," he murmured. Corin reached, not to touch but to hover his hand above it. "Cold," he said, and only that. Ghost settled at John's thigh, heavy and still. Stone Snake snorted and drew back. "Old things lie in old cracks. Old things in old places are best left to sleep." "Perhaps," said the half-hand. His eyes were on John, though. The wind sounded outside the stony lip like distant surf breaking on an iron shore. "It has the look of a tale that ends badly." "There are no tales that end well in these mountains," Eben said. John should have set it back where he'd found it. He felt that, too, as he had felt its call. But his hands would not lift it again to carry it out into the dark. The thought of putting it back felt like dropping Ghost from a cliff. He could not have explained it, the way he could not have explained why Longclaw felt honest in his hand where other blades had merely felt like tools. He only knew. "I'll carry it," he said. "It won't slow me. If it's a bad tale, let it be mine." Corin's mouth thinned. "Every man gets his share, Snow." He turned away, as if the thing had already been measured and accounted for. "We move at gray light." They did not sleep. Men of the watch learn to sleep in their boots on rock where all the warmth you can steal is what your body keeps for itself. But that night the mountain would not let them. The wind changed 3 times, and each time it came cold from another direction with another voice. Ghost stood twice and faced the dark, teeth bared at what only wolves see, and twice nothing stepped out of the sleet. John wrapped the egg in his cloak and set it close to the fire and kept it close to his knee, and once, without thinking, when the wind knifed a gap and made the coals hiss with cold breath, he drew it nearer still and felt the shell against his leg like a stone left too long in a stream, cold working into his bones. Near dawn, when the sky behind the knife peaks began to pale beyond black into the faintest bruised gray, the heartbeat in the shell quickened. John's head had been nodding. The change snapped him awake as surely as an elbow to the ribs. He put his palm to the shell and felt it, faster, then slowing again, then faster once more. The veins of blue were brighter now, and he had the sudden unreasonable impression that they were not veins at all but cracks lit from within. Eben saw his face and leaned. "What?" "Listen," John said, though there was nothing to hear. He did not let his voice rise. He pressed his ear to the shell, spoke in silence. He swallowed against a throat gone tight. Something in him that had always been winter-hardened melted a little, the way snow on a black stone melts when dead leaves fall on it. He did not know how to understand that. He only pressed his hand to the egg until his skin hurt. "Snow!" The half-hand's voice came quiet. John looked up. Corin's eyes settled on the egg, then on John. "We have a long path and a short day. If you must carry the mountain's secret, carry it fast. If it begins to sing, kill it before it brings the dark walking." John's mouth opened. He shut it. He was 19 and the frost had made him older, but there are some things that put a boy inside a man again, and the certainty of Corin's words did that. "I," he said, though he did not know if he lied. They moved as the day came, thin and stingy with its light. Snow had drifted in the night and covered the old tracks. The egg rode in John's pack wrapped in fur, the weight and ache between his shoulder blades. It answered to every step with that slow beat, reminding him of a song he did not yet know the words to. The wildlings found them by the old goat path when the wind came down out of the pass and brought the stink of men. They came in 2s and 3s between broken stones, shapes in furs and bones stitched into their collars. Men who had paid their lives in meat for this cold. Arrows fell first. One shattered on the rock by John's head. Another skated past and never struck. Ghost ran without sound and vanished. "Down!" Corin barked. They were down already. John saw the gaunt shape of a man with a skull upon his helm crest a boulder, bone teeth peering down as if the skull grinned to find them. Rattleshirt, Jon thought without knowing how he knew. Lord of Bones, the one the wildlings dressed in fool's trophies. The skull tilted. The man behind it shouted something Jon did not catch. More men came into view. Stone Snake vanished and reappeared behind a tumble of rock with a dagger in his hand and blood on its edge, as easy as slipping into shadow. He could not guard the egg and fight. The knowledge burned more than the cold. Qhorin saw him look and understood in the way old warriors read the young like wind over snow. The old ranger's face closed on a decision. "I know my fate," Qhorin said, quiet enough to be for Jon alone. "You know yours." "No." Jon had not said no to the half-hand since the first day. He had taken his lessons in the yard from men who measured him and weighed him and tried to beat the boy out of him for his own good. The word felt wrong in his mouth and right in his chest. "I won't." The half-hand's eyes were the color of sky before a storm breaks. "You'll do as the watch needs. They need a crow in Mance's hall, not one more blade on a mountain. When the time comes, make it look true." He was already pulling away by the time the echo of the words reached Jon. Ebben's breath misted like a dying man's in the cold as an arrow took him low in the ribs. Arrows sang. Stone chipped. Men shouted. Jon had Longclaw in his hand and did not remember drawing it. Ghost came like a pulled piece of night behind a man with a red beard and took him by the hamstring, so he screamed and went down with a spray of snow. There were too many. The mountain had always had too many for the men of the watch. In the tumble after, in the rush of hard choices and harder stone, Jon did what Qhorin set him to do. He hated that his body could move without asking his heart. He hated the surety in the half-hand's face when Jon's blade slid in. He hated that Ghost watched with quiet, red-eyed trust, as if all of this were rightly ordered. There was no hero's speech, no last words grand as banners. There was only the iron stink of blood in a cold so clean it burned the inside of the nose, and the sound a man makes when he chooses his end. When it was done, the wildlings who lived ringed him and looked on the boy who had put an old, dangerous legend in the snow. He still had Longclaw in his hand. He could not tell if his fingers trembled from cold or from the thing he had just done. The skull-helmed man laughed. "Crow's a killer of crows. Might keep him as a jester for our king. Take his sword, though. I like the look of it." Ygritte came with the others, lean and bright-eyed with the mountain in her hair. She looked at Qhorin lying with his blood gone into the snow and then at Jon. And there was something in her face he could not read and something in it he could. Pity without softness, knowledge without forgiveness. "You're a fool," she said, not loud, as if the foolishness were something between them alone. "But you did what he asked." Rattleshirt reached for Longclaw. Jon did not lift the blade. He set it down on the snow as if he were setting down his father's voice. He would not let a bone-wearing fool hold it. But he would not die for a dead man's sword, either. They bound his hands, though not harshly. They did not search his pack. If they had, he might have fought nails and teeth. He might have lost more than a sword. They took him to Mance Rayder under a sky gone white as bone and loud with ravens that did not show themselves. On the path down into the wide and broken valley, when the sun hung cold and low and the world had the flat color of a blade's side, the egg began to beat faster. No one heard it but Jon. At night, in a deerskin tent that smelled of smoke and old fat, the wildling woman who had a laugh like spilling grain Val brought him a bowl that steamed and a heel of tough bread. Ygritte slid in after her, took a place by the door flap, and watched him eat with that tilt to her mouth that was not a smile and not exactly not one. "So," she said at last, "will you give me the pretty stone you hug in your sleep, Crow? I could use it to hold stew down so the boys don't steal it when it's thin." He stopped with the spoon halfway to his mouth. His hand remained steady. "You know," he said, "everyone knows." She shrugged. "A boy who sleeps like he has a babe laid on his chest and a wolf at his side. That's a tale for the cook fire. Only your tale has a thing in it that looks like a goose egg carved by some old god. The Lord of Bones would have cracked it by now for the fun of the shatter, but he fears Mance as much as he loves himself." "You haven't told him," Jon said quietly. "Not yet." She looked at him the way you look at a river when the first ice skins it. thinking how thick, how strong, how soon. Tell me what it is, and I'll tell you whether to tell him. He swallowed. I don't know. That a lie. It's the only truth I have. He thought of telling her the rest, that it beat, that in the night when he laid it under his hands and tried to empty himself of fear and cold and the taste of blood, it answered him, slow and patient, as if it had always been there waiting for him to be quiet enough to hear. He did not tell her all of that. Not yet. She studied his face as if she could pull other truths out of his skin. You killed your crow. Not well, but true enough. Mance will like that. He has a place for a crow who'll turn. Maybe there's a place for a crow with a magic stone, too. I didn't come to turn, he said, and then realized what a fool's truth that was. He had come to turn because Corin needed it. I came to live long enough to do what was set before me. That's always why any of us goes where we go. She pushed hair out of her face with a mittened hand. Eat, if you're going to get yourself killed for a thing in your pack. May as well do it with food in your belly. The egg hatched on a night when the aurora walked over the mountains like a green river turned to silk and tossed in the wind. The camp was a scatter of light in a black bowl, small fires. Their smoke flat as if the cold pressed down with a hand. Men snored and coughed and talked low. Someone sang, not well and not for beauty, but because the night was too much for silence. Ygritte slept by the door flap, breath slow, hair a tangle, one hand on the hilt of a knife that had seen years of blunt use. Jon lay on his back with the egg on his chest beneath the furs. Ghost was a weight against his thigh. The heartbeat he had nursed with his own breath for nights quickened, matched to his, then climbed beyond it. The shell grew colder, a bitter cold that bit through furs and skin into bone, and for a heartbeat he thought that the thing inside was dying, that he had warmed it too much and brought death where whatever it would have been had wanted sleep. Then he felt warmth spread beneath the cold, not heat as a fire gives, but a sweetness like summer sunlight caught in leaves, and the cold did not vanish but changed, and the two together made the air between his ribs feel like it could sing. He did not think. He simply did what the body does when it recognizes something it had not known it was missing. He cut his palm with his eating knife, a short slide, and let the blood spill. It looked black in the tense dim. He ran it over the shell and the blue tracery woke suddenly bright. Not blue at all, but the white of hoarfrost frozen on glass catching starlight. The shell cracked with a sound like ice breaking on a winter river. Ygritte came upright with a curse, knife already bare. Quiet, Jon said, but quiet had no use anymore because the shell broke beneath his hands and a head pushed through, blunt and scaled and white as the shell itself, horn buds like pearls, eyes the pale gray of new ice. The steam that blew from its nostrils curled in the cold air and hung like thin banners. Ygritte did not shout for guards. She watched with her mouth open and the knife forgotten in her hand as the creature pushed and tore itself into the world. All sharp knees and long neck and a body the length of Jon's forearm. The membrane of its wings damp and clinging like thin skin, the color of morning frost. It flailed, chose terror, then remembered purpose and twisted toward the warmth of Jon's chest and the dark stickiness of his blood. He let it drink. Its tongue was rough and little teeth needled at his palm. When he ran his thumb along the ridge from its eye to the tip of its horn bud, it stilled and shut those pale eyes as if memorizing the shape of him in the dark. Ghost stood, stiff-legged, and bared his teeth. The dragon, that was what it was. What else could it be? Old songs be damned. Lifted its head and hissed, a sound so thin it almost wasn't one, and the dire wolf answered with a low sound, not quite a growl. For a heartbeat Jon thought he would have to throw himself between them. Then the dragon's hiss eased into a breath, and Ghost's hackles lowered one hair. Ygritte had not put down her knife. She had not moved to wake the camp, either. I was wrong, she said softly. You're not a fool. Or if you are, it's the sort of folly that makes songs. She leaned forward, and her breath ghosted the dragon's damp wing. He's ugly. He's beautiful, Jon said, and did not know he'd meant to speak until he heard his own voice. He cradled the small weight, feeling the bones like delicate sticks beneath skin warm as a hearth side and cold as pulled snow at the same time. The thing smelled of wet stone and metal and something he could not name that made the hair at his nape rise. What will you call him? She asked. Jon had not thought beyond this moment. He had not dared. Names mattered, as old Nan had once said between tales, the way bread and fire and oaths mattered. He thought of the dire wolf at his knee, of the first thing in his life that had been wholly his without shame, and the word came. "Ghost Wing," he said, and the small dragon lifted its head and blinked, as if a name were a thing you could hear as well as bear. When morning came, Mance Rayder stood just outside the tent flap while frost glittered on every rope and pole. The king beyond the wall had the look of a man who had slept in every sort of cold and learned how much of himself to give to it. He did not stride in like a lord. He ducked and stepped through, careful of the pole and careful of not making a clatter, like a man who had spent years making crowds not look at him. Rattleshirt came behind him with his walking rattle of bones. Tormund Giantsbane jostled and nearly took the pole down with his shoulder and then looked at the pole as if it had insulted his mother. Others crowded the door, breath smoking. "Show me," Mance said, and it was not a demand. It was a request a king did not need to make, which made it a sort of command men do not resent. Jon unwrapped Ghost Wing from his furs. The hatchling had eaten and slept and woken, and each time the pupils of his pale eyes had the narrow vertical slit of a hunter. He had tried to climb Jon's shirt and left little scratches like quill marks on his skin. Ghost watched him with a narrowed eye. The men who watched now did not breathe for a heartbeat. Rattleshirt laughed first, because bones make a clatter and men who wear bones must rattle. "The crow brings us a lizard with wings and a fancy name. I've seen bigger fish." Tormund cuffed him as if to make the rattle stop. "Your eyes are smaller than your skull, Lord of Bones. I've had dreams less mad than this and more likely to come true." He bent close, blow-red beard spilling down, and sniffed. "Smells like frozen iron. That's not anything I know." Mance looked last and longest. He did not reach to touch. He had a bard's hands, long-fingered, nimble when he tied a string or polished a note out of air. Old men with harps sing the dragons, aye, but they sing them south of the wall, with heads bigger than carts and names older than kings. They don't sing of such a thing beyond the wall, white as the snow. Yet here it is. His mouth quirked without turning to a smile. "What did the half-hand seed into the snow when he sent you among us, Crow? A blade? A spy? A song?" "I didn't make him," Jon said. "I found the egg. It hatched because..." How could he say it? Because the world had been waiting for him? Because blood and fire and cold and a boy's fear and a man's vow had made a door the little creature could step through? Because it was time. That's the sort of answer priests give, Rattleshirt sneered. "Shut your bone hole," Tormund said, and Rattleshirt shut it because Mance turned his head and did nothing more. Mance crouched and looked at Ghost Wing until the hatchling lifted his own head and looked back. For a heartbeat, Jon felt something move in the space between them, some measuring, some weighing of worth. Then Mance straightened. "You'll keep him," he said to Jon. "He chose you. You can't make a boy's beast serve a man who it won't take to." He turned to the crowd outside. "No one touches him. No one hurts him. If he hurts you, you were in the way. And what do you mean to do with a crow who carries a tail like this?" Rattleshirt asked. "What do you think?" Mance said mildly. "We march for the wall with a winter worm flying above us, and all the kings of the south will piss their furs." Ygritte's eyes cut to Jon's then, and there was the heat of the cook fire and the white of the frost together in them. He thought of Corrin's quiet surety. He thought of the wall and the ravens and men in black with frost in their beards, and of boys in the practice yard with new swords, and of Sam standing uncertain with a weight of books upon him as if they were iron. He thought of the old spells that men said were worked into the ice itself, old as the first men's songs, old as the red faces on white trees. He thought, too, of the other things that walked in the dark beyond the fires, the things that left bones that did not belong to elk or bear. He had seen a man rise with blue light in his eyes. He had put a torch into another and smelled the meat of him burn. Ghost Wing hissed softly, as if he felt his thought darken. "Training a dragon is the same as training a hound," Tormund said later by the cook fire. "You smack it and it learns," he declared, and then yelped when Ghost snapped at the meat in his hand and took 2 fingers worth of glove in the bargain. All right, you hug it and it learns." He laughed, because he laughed at hurt and at beauty both, as if the same part of him answered to both. "You'll need leather, and a good seat. He'll have you dropping your balls on rock if you try to climb on him with nothing but wish and pride." "I won't climb him," John said, though he had dreamed since the hatching that he was not bound by paths anymore, that he had a way to look down and see the mountain as a map under his hands instead of an enemy under his boots. "Not yet," Tormund conceded. "He's no bigger than a spring goat, and even drunk men know not to ride a goat. But he'll eat and he'll sleep and he'll grow. Everything grows in the free air. If the tales are true, dragons grow to fill the sky if you let them." Ygritte knelt and held out meat on her palm, fingers straight. "Come on, ugly," she coaxed, and Ghostwing hissed at her, sniffed, then delicately plucked the scrap with a care that made her laugh. "Oh, he's a gentle babe when he wants." "He's not a babe," John said. The word felt too soft. The creature's bones were delicate now, but there was nothing soft in him. "He's a promise." "To who?" she asked. The night wind stirred her hair and carried her words to him as if they were secrets. "To whatever is coming," John said, and did not know he'd meant to say it. Word of the white hatchling went ahead of them as words do. Men carried it to fires and tucked it under tongues with their mutton. Women carried it on their backs with their babes. Children carried it to sleep like a toy. When they broke camp and marched, they looked up not at ravens but at the small shape that sometimes fluttered from John's shoulder to a spear's tip and back again. The membrane of wings translucent as fog when the sun hit them. Ghostwing rode his shoulder or the crook of his arm or the hood of John's cloak, and sometimes, when the cold was sweetest and the wind most pure, he lifted himself and beat upward, a few spans, a little drift, then back, complaining with hisses and that odd thin piping that was not quite a chirp. At night John warmed his hands on the small belly and woke to him gnawing laces and tugging fur with tiny needle teeth. The cut in his palm healed slowly and then not at all, reopening whenever the dragon's tongue rasped it, as if the creature had claimed that place for his own. Ghost watched and did not intervene. Once, when Varamir Sixskins came close with his pale eyes and stood too still in the shadow of John's tent, Ghost stood, went to the man, and stared without blinking until the skin changer grimaced and turned away. "He'll try your beast," Ygritte warned after Varamir drifted out into the white night. "He tries all beasts." "He can try," John said. He felt a prickle along his spine, and for a moment the air between him and Ghost went taut as a bowstring. A line pulled tight, a line you could cut on. Then it slackened, but it did not vanish. He had never before thought of a thought as something that might be bitten. When Ghostwing began to fly in earnest, he did it all at once and without asking permission. They were crossing a shallow cut where the wind had laid the snow in waves like a frozen sea. John eased him from his shoulder to his forearm so he could take a leap and make the far side in a stride. The dragon hissed, launched, and the membrane of his wings caught light and wind, and the small body lifted as if snatched by a hand. John saw his throat swell and heard a sound like a breath turned inside out. There was no flame. There was only a plume of white so pure it made the snow look dirty, a spew of freezing air that made frost grow like lace on a dead weed. The plume touched the drift at the lip of the cut, and the snow glazed into ice with a crack. Ghostwing beat twice and was across, light as a blown leaf. He turned and hung there, legs tucked, wings steady, looking back with a reptile patience while John stood with his mouth open and his breath smoking. Tormund hauled him by the hood. "Move, Crow. He'll be hungry when he lands, and you look like the sort of fool who'd stand and stare until he eats your ear." It became a strange sort of rhythm. By day they marched, and Ghostwing hunted whatever would not be missed. Voles under the crust of snow, a thin rabbit, once a white bird that exploded in feathers and left him sneezing. He found that pipe of not sound and breathed a blade of cold that bit wood and made it crack, and then took thin bites of what the cold had made still for him. By night he climbed the guy ropes of tents and slept across John's throat in a warm weight that had somehow both heat and winter lodged inside it. Mance watched and measured. He gave his orders sparingly, as if each one cost him a little coin of something he would not replenish. He sent word ahead to the Thens to bring men down from the frozen valleys. He talked to giants in their own growling cadence. He stood with old women who had faces like dried apples and listened to them in ways that made other men quiet who were never quiet. When men said, "We have a dragon now," he nodded. And when men said the dragon was the wrong color, he nodded at that too and said, "Suppose he's the right color for where we are." Jon waited for the other. He did not tell this to Ygritte. He did not tell it to Ghost. He did not tell it to himself in words. But the waiting ate out a hollow at the center of him. The world had shifted with the hatching, and things that had kept to the edges of fires now would come to the flames. They did not come first to him. They went to the old ring of the fist. Word came in through a hunter whose face had the same blankness as the white he'd crossed to find them. He told it like a man telling the weather, because there is no way to tell the full of such a thing. The Watch had made a camp there among the old ring of stones where hunters had once lit fires to keep wolves at bay. They had sent their birds. The birds had not returned. Then the wind changed. The dead came with it. The ring that men set to keep beasts out kept men in. The snow ran with soundless feet. The cold itself killed. Jon did not ask how many died. The hunter did not say. Men do not put weights on such things when the scale would break if you tried. He saw it from the edges of a dream. They were 3 days' march from the fist when the sky opened and let out snow with a gentleness that felt wrong, as if the world had thrown a sheet over a body to keep the eyes clear. Ghostwing woke him with a small bite to the ear and a hiss that bubbled into that thin pipe. Ghost stood and looked to the north. His fur lay flat and his mouth was closed, but the heat in his body welled like a hearth struck with fresh wood. Jon threw on cloak and steel and stepped into the night. The snow fell in flakes so big each one seemed a small, failing lark. There was no wind. There was only that steady downrush, that quieting, that slow laying on of a new white skin. The camp was awake already. Men stood with mouths open. Tormund had no jokes. Mance's eyes shone like wet stone. The glow came first, faint as a ghost of dawn on the wrong horizon. Then the sound, so thin he had to tilt his head to put it in his ear. Not horns, not steel, a sort of creaking like a tree bent past what it should bear. Then the sky flowered green and blue with aurora, as if some god had spilt a bucket of paint and decided not to clean the mess. And in that light he saw a blacker shape move over the far line of hills, and the tiny sparks that were men's fires snuffed out one after the other like midges. Mance said nothing, because sometimes there is nothing to say. He looked at Jon, just looked, and in his eyes there was the question a king asks when there is a thing he cannot command. Jon could not fly to that ring of stones. Ghostwing could not carry his weight farther than a leap and a slow drift. What he could do was go. So he went. They left the great body of the host to Mance and took a handful of men who could move on quiet feet. Ygritte came because she did not ask permission when it concerned life and death. Tormund came because he had sons and a belly that would not be full if he stood back. Varamir followed 2 sleds he had no right to, and his shadow slunk in the shape of a brown bear, and his pale back showed the scars of old lashings when the bear was not nearby. The storm had no teeth. That frightened Jon more than any knife of wind. The snow came down and the air stayed still, and the sound carried as it does on certain winter nights when you can hear a war the next valley over. At dawn they saw the fist. The old ring of stones wore white caps. Black figures lay inside like pebbles dropped into milk. The wind had not eaten the tracks the dead make. Jon had seen those tracks before and had promised himself never to see them again. He kept too many promises. They did not sing. They did not shout. They moved careful and slow, because anger makes noise and noise feeds death beyond the wall. When Ghost eased over the lip of the slope with his body low to the snow, Jon followed, and the others left deeper marks behind him. The first corpse had blue eyes that might have been beautiful in another world. The hand that had frozen raised toward the sky, and the finger bones showed where flesh had cracked. Jon did not look at the face. He put his torch to the clothes that still carried the shape of the man kept inside them. The flame took slow, unwilling, as if the cold wanted to make the world careful and the world rebelled. They found a boy with one boot gone and his toes black and waxy like melted candles. Ygritte stopped and bent and touched his hair, and Jon saw she had done it without thought, the way you touch the brow of a fevered child in a crofter's hut. She lifted her hand and her face was all hard. "It wasn't the wildlings," she said. "Best they know that south of the wall." "They won't," Tormund said. "Men see what they want in snow same as in glass." They found a watcher on the ring's edge who was not dead. He crouched with a cloak pulled up around his head and eyes that had seen too much of the white. He looked at Jon like a man who has dreamed a thing and woken to find it is true and does not want it to be. "Snow," he said, and his teeth chattered around the word so it turned into a different word in his mouth. Is that a dragon behind you, or has the cold cured me of sense?" Ghostwing clung to Jon's shoulder and hissed, as if he knew every word, as if he disapproved of being an argument. "Help me draw the men together," Jon said. They dragged the bodies into a rough circle and put flame to what would they could steal from sleds and shields. Some of the dead would not burn, as if the cold had eaten away anything that could love fire. Then a man stiffened under Jon's hands and opened his blue eyes, and the world narrowed to the width of a blade. Ghostwing hissed so high and thin Jon almost could not hear it. He turned and put his body between the thing and Ygritte, though she needed no protection. She already had her knife in hand. "Back," Jon called to the living men, and lifted his voice to carry to the dead as if sound were a shield. "Back!" The other came. It slid out of the white as if the white had made it. Armor that was not metal slid colors in a way that made Jon's eyes ache to look. Its sword was a long shard, and the snow it brushed did not cling to it but fled. The creature moved with a terrible grace, as if it had trained in winter 1,000 years. Ghost snarled and then made no sound at all. The men fell into a slow, helpless hush. Ghostwing's chest swelled like a bellows, and he gave his new white breath. It struck the other's blade and feathered along it like frost along a pane. Hoarfrost rushed across that clear surface in branches, white upon white, and the blade sang. The song was not the song of steel. The other turned its mirror eyes to the thing on Jon's shoulder, as if noticing a midge and then noticing the midge had teeth. It stepped, and where it stepped the snow did not remember its feet. Jon felt the cold come off it like a thought. His hands found the dragonglass dagger he had kept under his clothes since the day Ghost had nosed him to dragonglass at the fist the first time, since a night under other stars with other dead. He had not wanted to bring the dagger to this place again, but certain truths do not care what a man wants. He drew it, and it lay against his palm as if the years were a blink and the last terror a memory you could hold to for warmth. The other came fast. Jon moved slower, but he moved true because fear and practice had burned a channel in him. The shard sword flashed. Longclaw leapt to meet it as if it had swallowed the half-hand's will. The blades kissed and screamed like winter cracking oak. The glass dagger was a thought in his left hand, and his left hand was not his best. But he set it and stepped inside at the right heartbeat because his right hand had been taught by men who had died and by a boy who had lived. The dragonglass kissed the other's pale armor, and the world changed pitch. The thing screamed in a sound that made the small hairs in Jon's ears try to flee his skull. The point of the dagger slid in, brittle as sugar and sharp as truth, and the other came apart like old frost under a boot, a collapse of snow and light and shards too fine to hold. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the dead within their circle of flames began to stir, as if the unmaking of their master had loosened the threads. Jon's torch went to work. So did Tormund's great hands and Ygritte's knife, and a boy from the watch with eyes blown wide who had yet to speak his name. The work was ugly, and it saved men for a day and no more. At dusk they pulled back. The sky had found a new color the Southrons did not have a word for. An old bruise turned to glass. Ghost loped at Jon's side. Ghostwing clung to his shoulder and hissed now and then, a little, as if scolding him for something he could not name. Snow came down soft as the touch of a woman who knows she will not see you come morning. They made camp, and, for the first time, the wildlings who had laughed called Jon something besides Crow. You could hear it slip around the fires like a hand over hand on a rope. Rider, though he had never sat the small dragon's back. Winterkin, Iceblood, Oathbreaker, Oathkeeper. Men will always make a man into a story when a thing happens under their eyes they have no other way to hold. "What do you want to do with him?" Mance asked later, when they were alone with only a little candle between them and the night. Because you know what I want. I want my people safe on the other side of the wall. The wall is a stubborn thing. A dragon's breath, even a white one, is a key I might try in an old lock. The wall isn't a lock, Jon said. He had not meant to say it, but once the words stepped into the world, they would not go back. It's a wound that was stitched and set to heal by slow magic. You don't break stitches if you want a wound healed. You don't tear what old hands sewed. He thought of the look on the other's face, or what passed for its face, when Ghostwing's cold breath had slid along its sword. It had been a look of interest, and that terrified him in a way fear never could. Mance watched him. The candle made his face an old map. Whose son are you? A man's, Jon said, because sometimes the only truth that saves you is the smallest. And a night's watchman, whatever you think of that after tonight. Both of those may be true, and said, and both of them may be a lie. The world has always made men out of both. Answer me this instead. What would you do if you were me, and you cared for the free folk as a father cares for a child he could not admit was his because the night is full of men with laws? I'd take them under the wall, Jon said, and the words felt like a stone dropped. Not with flame, not with cold, with a bargain. Your bargain feels like a song sung to a lord behind a warm table, Mance said. No unkindness in it. Your crows are hungry and thin. They listen to men in armored halls who do not listen back. Why would I trust a bargain when a dragon might open a door? Because the dragon might break more than a door, Jon said. There are spells in the wall I don't know the words to. I think you don't either. When we break a thing we don't understand, other things come in that we don't understand. What walked at the fist waits for such doors? Mance rubbed a hand across his jaw. He looked old in the candlelight, and then he looked like a man set against winter with a thin cloak and a good tune. All right, say I try your bargain. Who does the talking? I do, Jon said, and saw Ygritte's face at the edge of the tent flap and Ghost's eyes deeper in the dark beyond. He had known this truth before he said it. He had been walking toward it since he had put the dragonglass dagger in his belt again and not left it in the snow with the other old sins. The march to the wall was a long bleeding of hope across ice. Giants walked with their hair like straw on a cold barn floor, their eyes thoughtful and their hands gentle with their own children. The Vens came down from their high bowls with their bronze glinting like old honey. Mothers wrapped babes and carried them across their chests and sang the sort of thin songs that are less about tunes than breath kept steady and cold. The men who would fight walked at the edges. The men who would decide who ate walked at the rear. Men always arranged themselves the same way, as if they were sleds loaded with the only goods they had. Ghostwing grew, and his wings went from translucent to opaline, to the hard white of a winter sun burned thin by cloud. He ate more, and he ate with a careful ferocity that made men step back without saying why they did. He learned to fly from Jon's forearm to the top of a pole, and from the top of the pole to the outstretched branch of a dead white tree. Once he tried for a hare and came up with snow in his teeth instead, and the way he narrowed his pale eyes made Ygritte laugh all morning. When the wall rose ahead of them, it was like coming upon a mountain a man had known all his life as a story and only then decided to believe. The frozen face of it went up into a sky that could not hold it. The blue in it was a color men south never name. Ghost's fur stood along his spine, from neck to tail. Tormund spat and then looked to see where it froze. Well, he said, a boy looks on it and thinks it's a sword. A man looks on it and thinks it's a grave. Which are you? Ygritte asked. I'm a man with a sword buried in his yard, Tormund said cheerfully. I know where to find both, and I know which kills slower. There were black specks upon the white, and those were the men of the watch. Jon stood with his hands empty, Ghostwing on his shoulder, Ghost pressed into his leg. He had not thought this far. He had thought of speeches, yes, and bargains, and using all the words Maester Aemon had taught him like keys against doors. He had not thought of what it would feel like to stand here with a living thing the world did not expect and call out to a world that did not want to hear. Show them your hands, Ygritte said. So close her words did not leave a breath trail. Empty first, then show them the dragon. Men are softer to wonders once they've seen you're unarmed. He did not tell her that some wonders make men reach for tools faster. He stepped out far enough for the men on the top to make his shape against the whiteness and cupped his hands around his mouth. The cold took his shout and ate it and sent back a smaller thing that was just enough. "Castle Black," he called. "Jon Snow of the Night's Watch returns with parley." The specks moved. The voice that came back was thin and iron both. "Return in chains, Oathbreaker, and we'll talk." "Tell them another truth," Ygritte said, and it was very nearly a kindness. "Tell them you have a dragon." He hesitated. Then Ghostwing, who had no patience with human hesitation, leapt to the sky and found a wind that had not been there a moment before, because sometimes the world makes its own weather for a new thing that wants it. The hatchling, no longer quite a hatchling, hung there above Jon, white upon white, and the men on the wall drew closer to the edge like crows to a new thing on a field. Jon lifted his chin. "And I have a dragon," he called, and heard the word fall into the old spells like a stone into a deep well. Silence, then laughter, thin, brittle, a sound men make when they cannot help themselves. Then no laughter at all, and a ripple. And he could not see their faces, but he could feel the shape of them change, as if a wind had gone through their bodies. Ghostwing swept down and landed on Jon's forearm with a little hop that jarred his elbow and made him grin in spite of the insufficient moment. The dragon put his white head against Jon's cheek in a gesture men could call affection, though it had more of possession in it. "Open the gate," someone shouted above. "Hold," another shouted. "He brings the free folk with him. He brings 1,000 deaths with him if we are fools." "Bring me a horn and a lord," Jon called, "because sometimes you must set the rules yourself. Bring me a man with the right to speak for your order, and I'll speak for mine." Took time. It always does, and men in cold count time by breaths so that time feels like a thing you spend and regret or hoard and regret more. They brought Sam first because there was no one else to bring with words big enough to hold the whole of what stood outside the wall. Sam looked down with his round face gone thinner with winter. He pushed his spectacles up and peered. "Jon," he said, as if he'd never expected to say the name again. There's a Tell them to listen," Jon called. "Tell them there's a way to save more lives than we lose." Sam's head turned, and he vanished into the dark behind the wall's edge. Tormund huffed. "If that's your lord, I can see why you think bargains are worth a try." "It's not," Jon said. "It's my friend." "Better," Tormund said, without cheer and without mockery. When the gate did open, when the heavy chains rattled and the hard groan of ice on ice came, when the first of the men in black came out with spears leveled and faces careful and wary and not unkind, Jon felt Ghostwing dig needle claws into his arm and startle at the groan as if hearing an old animal rise. Ygritte's breath hitched where she stood, and he felt her pull away from him one pace, as if some part of her had expected, and wanted, the wall to refuse, to remain itself and keep her on the right side of a tale that ends the way all good wildling tales end. With men in black cast as the winter, and the winter cast as victory, and everything in between a joke. Bowen Marsh came with a handful of stewards because stewards were what the Watch had in plenty. His mouth was a thin line with too much blood in it. He looked at Jon as if counting what he wanted to say and subtracting the useful from the deadly. "You return," he said. "You bring enemies. I bring people who will die on this side without your help and will die on your side without your help," Jon said. Ghostwing hissed softly. A breath the stewards heard and the men with spears heard. "I bring a chance to make the dead have fewer mouths." Bowen looked at the dragon as if trying to decide if it were a trick. "You bring a blasphemy." "No," Jon said. "I bring a story you haven't heard before." That was when the horns blew. They did not sound like the horns of the Watch, which have a shape men know and take comfort in even when they call death. They sounded like the sound a glacier makes when it splits and the pieces decide what mountain to go to. Men looked to the Treeline. The Treeline looked back. The dead came out in a line as clean as a cut. They came without hurry and without rest. Snow rose behind them in tall breaths as they walked. The other at their head wore light that did not belong to men's fires, and he carried a sword that remembered Ghostwing's breath and did not like it. Inside, Bowen Marsh said, voice thin as morning ice. You cannot shut the gate on them, John said. Not on us. Watch me, Bowen Marsh said, and might have been about to do it because that is what men do when walls are what they have, whatever the world needs. Enough, said a voice behind him, and there was iron in it that had been hammered on the same anvil as the wall. John had never been glad enough to see a man in his life. Jeor Mormont rode out on a shaggy pony with frost in its mane and lines in his face that winter had carved. He looked older than stone and younger than authority. I will not see the gate shut on children, he said to Bowen Marsh, and then he looked at John and nodded once in the way the old bear did when he saw you bringing him something he wanted but did not mean to thank you for. You live. For now, John said. Your pet is ugly, the old bear said, looking Ghostwing over in the same way he might look a new sort of bread, to see if it was fit for the table. He is what the world sent, John said, and Ghostwing hissed with a delicate vanity. Bring them in, Mormont told Bowen Marsh. We will regret it. We will regret not doing it more. Men moved. Men always do when a voice carries the right chord. The gate did not open all at once to swallow the world. It opened in careful increments. It opened like someone lifting a lid to let a little steam out and not all the soup. Women came first, children clinging and crying and not crying because they had learned how to hold tears inside so they did not freeze on their cheeks. Men followed with faces like carved things because carved things do not show fear. The giants came last and ducked their heads and looked like men who had entered a place that did not have room for their grief. The others did not hurry. They did not run to seize the gate open. They moved forward with the same surety as a tide across a beach. John could feel their cold before he could see their eyes. Ghostwing tensed, and John felt a thread between his own spine and the dragon's spine pull taut again, tighter than it had ever been, as if it were being plucked by a finger he could not see. Ghost lifted his muzzle, and the sound that came from him was not a bark, not a growl, but something that made the hair lift along men's arms. Back, Mormont said, as calm as telling a cook to salt the stew. Archers, one volley. The arrows skittered like black insects across ice. Some found meat. The meat stood up again. John felt the careful collapse of hope all along the line and knew that if they shut the gate and left half of the free folk outside, the other would leave the bodies, and the bodies would stand, and their numbers would grow like a measure in a song that has no end save the silence after the end of men. He did not think. He ran. Ghost ran with him because Ghost was a part of him. Ghostwing lifted and beat the air above his head, and his breath streamed the wrong color for breath. The first dead thing to reach him was a man whose beard had frozen into his chest. John slid under a reaching hand and felt the frost in the air eat tears from his eyes. The other stepped out from behind its men as if stepping onto a dance floor, and the lights within its armor changed like scales of a fish moving in a river. Now, John told Ghostwing, and did not know if the dragon understood the sound or the shape of his thought under it. Ghostwing breathed. The cold that spilt out of him was not the cold of the other, though it bit as deeply. It was a cold that laid a skin over water and made it safe to walk on. A cold that held. A cold that meant form. It struck the icy sword, and the singing of it changed. Frost grew on the blade like white ivy. John went in with dragonglass. The other had learned. It moved its arm, and the dragonglass cracked as if the dagger had been waiting for the moment to betray him. The blade broke in his hand and left a stub. He did not despair. He stepped into the step he had made in his mind 100 times and brought Longclaw in a low cut for where a man's knee would be, because if a man cannot stand, he cannot lift a sword. The Valyrian steel bit, and the other moved as if amused by gravity. The black blade kissed the pale armor. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a vein of dark grew within the pale, not black, not blue, some other color a winter sky gets when it is tired of the same two colors. The thing made a sound like glass powdered, and the veins spread. Ghostwing bit. He was small yet, but his teeth were as true as the world makes teeth on first try. He bit into the other's wrist where the glove met the sleeve. The other turned its mirror face to the small white thing that had dared to put teeth upon it, and if a face of light can show surprise, it did. John brought the broken dragonglass up and drove it under the shelf of pale chin where a jaw would be if this had been a man. The shard found a place to live. It lived, and the other did not. The light went out of the flesh with softness, like a candle snuffed by 2 fingers. The dead closest fell as if slackened. Others further out turned with that slow wrongness that makes a man's stomach turn before his head understands. The gate groaned. The giants pulled. The men of the watch shouted and did not sound like boys anymore. Mansa's people poured through and did not stop to ask for names or permission. When it was done, when the gate's maw closed with a bang that shook powder down in a bright mist and the chains settled with a final rattle, John bent and put his forehead to Ghostwing's neck. The dragon's body hummed with a note he felt in his jaw. Ghost leaned against his thigh with the weight of everything that had not died. They did not sing. There is no song for pulling half a world through a door and slamming it on the rest. There are only orders and counting and work. Mormont's voice carried like a pole across a stream you cannot cross without a pole. Bring this, do that. Take those, light fires, douse flames near the wall, water in buckets. Meat to the children, no meat for the men until the women eat, no arguments. If you must argue, argue with me. Bowen Marsh's mouth was a line still, but he moved when the old bear set his voice upon him. Sam went to and fro as if a book had come alive and he must chase all the words to put them back in their places. Ygritte stood and watched a world she had not expected to see, and her hands tightened on the hilt of her knife and then loosened, and she did that twice before she put it back in its sheath. When night fell outside the wall, it fell inside too. The old spells hummed like a big beast sleeping. Ghostwing would not go near the ice. He hung back and hissed and blinked his pale eyes and scraped the ground with one claw. John went to the wall and put his hand on the face of it. The cold ran up his arm like water up a wick. He felt something hum in answer, something that did not know his name and did not want to. He drew his hand away and the humming stopped. "They say there's magic in it," said a voice at his shoulder. Maester Eamon stood with a boy on either side of him to hold him steady. His blind eyes turned to John's face and made a lie of his blindness. "If there is, it's old magic. Old magic does not enjoy being woken." He tilted his head, and John saw the cloud of his breath come out in neat puffs. "You brought a thing to wake it. I didn't mean to." "No," Eamon said, and the word had nothing of reproach in it. "No one ever means to bring a storm into a room. They only mean to open a door." John thought of the wildlings within the wall, of infants wrapped so thick you could not see their faces, of old men being led by sons who had not expected to be sons to their fathers again, of Mance inside a place he had defied for years and looking at its face as if at a lover he had wronged and finally won, of Tormund telling a joke too loud because he could not abide any silence too long. He thought of the blue eyes in the snow as if an eye could float without flesh. He thought of Ghostwing's breath and the way it slid along an ice blade and left lace behind. "What is he?" he asked, surprising himself with how raw the question sounded. "He should be fire. He is cold. He hurts the cold." "Fire is not only heat," Eamon said. "Fire is change. Cold is stasis. The world you were born to sits between. You are a boy made of both. Why should a beast of yours not take both into himself?" His smile was thin and very tired and very fond. "If I were a poet, I would put it better. I am only a maester. I count days and take temperatures." John did not smile. He lifted his hand and Ghostwing pressed his head into it with a delicacy that was almost apology. "He'll be bigger," John said. "Yes," Eamon said. "So will everything else." The days after were the sort of long that lives in bone. Men argued about food before they argued about gods. The free folk did not bow to rules they had not made. The watchmen did not bow to hunger that had not come in black. Women looked at men as if weighing whether they were worth starving beside. Children learned to be quiet because voice makes moisture and moisture freezes and cracks skin. Mance and Mormont found a way to put orders between them as if they were laying planks over a thin place in ice. They did not like it. They did it anyway. Ghostwing learned the castle's paths with the arrogance of any beast that believes the world is for his feet. He snatched rats from under barrels and left their tails like gifts in John's boots. He learned to come when John whistled and to stop when John shouted and to breathe cold only when John's fingers made a certain shape in the air. He grew. He slept with his wings half spread and his long neck coiled under John's chin in a way that made sleep dangerous and dear. Men came to look at him as they came to look at any wonder that endured past its first telling. Some came to hate him because he was a thing no one had asked to have and no one had a word to put him in a place that left that man's world unbroken. Others came to love him the way men love a blade that fits the hand. Most came like men come to a cliff, careful, fascinated, ready to leap and not ready at all. Melisandre came when the world sent her. She came with a king and with fire and with a voice that lit the sleep in men's heads like a dry field under a thrown torch. Stannis Baratheon rode under a hard banner into the cold, and the men in black and the men in furs turned their heads to him in the same movement. He had a face like a truth that cannot be sweetened. The Red Woman walked through the gate with her hair burning like the only warm thing in a white world, and her eyes came at once to the white dragon high on a broken crenel. She stood beneath him and lifted her bare hands into cold and did not flinch. "Light and darkness," she murmured, "not to the king and not to Jon, but to the world. I prayed for a sign. The Lord of Light sends me a perfect riddle." Stannis looked at Jon and did not see a boy. He saw a piece to place. "They say you have a DR. Aegon," he said, without courtesy and without insult. "I have a friend," Jon said, and Ghostwing hissed a soft answer that made the Red Woman's mouth quirk. "A friend can be a sword," Stannis said. "A sword can be a crown." "I swore an oath," Jon said, "to be a sword in the darkness and a watcher on the walls." "Good," Stannis said, because he was a man who loved oaths harder than he loved his own breath. "We will need all the oaths the world has left. Keep yours. Give me your dragon when I ask it." "He isn't mine to give," Jon said. His voice surprised him with its steadiness. Melisandre's eyes went to the mark on his palm, the place Ghostwing had claimed. "We are all more ours than the world would have," she said. "And less." When she stood near Ghostwing, he flinched, and that was new. He did not mind torches. He did not mind cookfires. He now minded the Red Woman's warmth as if the flame in her were a different sort of thing than men made of wood and oil. She laughed, very softly, not mockery, not delight, as if she were the only one hearing a tune when the rest of the hall had fallen quiet. "Child of winter," she said to the dragon. "Child of summer's end." "You won't burn him," Jon said, because after the words he had no other tool left in his mouth. She looked at him with a patience he mistrusted more than any quick answer. "Why would I burn what the Lord sends as sign? I am not a fool. I will watch and I will make guesses and pretend they are certain. That is what all priests do. But I am not a fool." "Some are," Tormund put in, sauntering past as if dragged to the words by impish luck. "Most are. All if you have a skin of sour wine in you. I've known fewer fools than priests by count and more fools than priests by evidence." He winked at Jon and stole bread from a steward's tray. "Don't let the Red Woman teach your lizard tricks you don't want it learning. If it starts spitting fire instead of frost, I'll keep it for a brazier at my bed." Ghostwing hissed and took the bread out of Tormund's hand without touching skin. The big man laughed and clapped his chest. "See, he's already learned the only trick worth learning. If he learns to pour me ale, I'll kneel to him. Winter does not break because men put a dragon against it. Winter bends sometimes and makes a new shape for itself. The dead came again, not in the daylight of men's orders and plans, but with wind and the hush that precedes certain sorts of grief." The wall hummed. The Red Woman's songs curled on the air like smoke that does not want to vanish. Stannis drilled men in ice as if he were turning them into other things, like cold iron into steel. Mance watched and stood apart and did not break under the looks he earned by standing apart. Jon slept less and woke more and learned when to keep the dragon close and when to let him hunt the dark edges of the world. His white wings cutting a line even black could not smudge. He learned how to sit on Ghostwing's back with rope around his legs and a pad beneath him and not fall when the dragon leapt. The first time he sat, he did not let the creature lift more than the height of a man's shoulders. The second, he let him lift twice that. The third, the dragon decided for both of them, and Jon saw the world from a height that made his heart drop and soar at once. Ghostwing's breath left lace on the old ice far below, and the men who looked up were very small, and some of them were afraid, and some of them were brave, and none of them mattered to the balance that held the small white creature in the old blue sky. On the night that marked the turning of something no one could name, the others came not for the gate but for the heart of the wall. The sound woke John like a hand between the ribs. He rolled and the dragon rolled with him, as if they were both born to the same startle. Ghost stood already at the door, body tight, teeth shown without sound. The air had a taste like old pennies and far snow. John ran without his cloak and felt the cold on his bare neck like a teachable lesson. Men stood in the yard like nails in a board. The wall loomed above like a god that would not stoop to see them. The light along its top came and went like breath caught between laughter and weeping. Far along the ice, where men did not walk and old cracks kept their secrets, a blooming happened. It looked like a flower, if flowers were made by frost finding a way into places it had not gone. It spread in little clutches, and where it spread the sound in the air changed, as if some harpstring had been plucked and left to shiver. Melisandre stood bareheaded in the yard and lifted her hands. "Not yet," she said, to the night, to the ice, to the men, to God. "Not here." John did not think. He could not have said later what he thought. He climbed the stair cut in the ice with the dragon beneath his arm and Ghost at his heels, and the stair itself felt like memory he had not lived. He did not stop to call men to follow. Men followed because a man without sense of death is often who men choose to fall in behind. The top of the wall was a road the size of some lord's keeps. Wind lived there with a right. The bloom of frost was not beautiful up close. It was terrible, like a disease written in a patient's flesh by a god with neat script. It ran out in lines that had purpose. The others walked along those lines the way a thief walks the top of a garden wall, calm, delicate, with a grace that made men sick. Ghostwing lifted from John's arm before John could say now. He went with his thin white pipe of a breath and laid it along the bloom. The bloom stopped. The line of the other's path found an end. The leading other turned his mirror eyes upon the small white thing, and the small white thing showed his teeth in a way that answered 1,000 years of winter with one heartbeat of winter that was not the other's. The clash of those colds made the air ring thin and bright. John's hands bled through their scars. He did not know that until later. He ran at the other because the way the world narrowed left him no room for a different act. Longclaw found the thin seam along its shin and bit. The other's sword came down, and the scream of it against Valyrian steel made other men flinch and one man fall to his knees and press his hands over his ears like a child. Ghost leapt and found nothing to stand on because the other was not where it had been a heartbeat before. Ghostwing breathed again, and the breath took the other's shoulder and left a sculpture of hoarfrost on the curve of light that was armor. The other's sword began to tremble in its hand. It did not drop it. It held. "More!" John shouted, and the dragon hissed as if the word hurt his ears and gave what he had. The cold went over John's arm and bit him to the bone but did not enter him. It did not feel like the other's cold. It felt like standing at the wall and understanding that the world had been stitched and your task was to keep it from tearing. The other broke with a sound like an icicle pinging in too hot water. It fell in shards and powder and a light that left afterimages across the ice and into men's eyes. The bloom in the ice drew in on itself and left old ice, plain ice, gloriously ordinary ice. The night took a breath men could hear. Down in the yard, someone began to laugh that laughter a body makes when the knife misses the heart by the width of a hair. When the dawn came, thin and used up already, the world did not look different. There were still too many mouths and too few cattle. There were men with bones under skin that had not known such smallness of flesh since the last winter. The free folk had brought their stories with them, and the men of the watch had not thrown theirs away, and the two sets of stories chewed on one another's ends and stuck in teeth. Stannis counted swords and coin and measures of barley and decided who should hate him next. Melisandre lit fire in a bowl and told the fire to tell her what would comfort her, and it did not. Mormont sat at a trestle and wrote a letter to a man who would not answer and then tore it up because the ink had frozen in the inkwell and because men who have the right to command sometimes want to be boys with the right to have fathers. Jon stood with Ghost at his side and Ghostwing on his arm and looked north. The world did not care if he looked. He looked anyway. He felt the weight of the dragon on his bones, as if the creature had grown inside him as much as upon his shoulder. He thought of Corin on the mountain and of the egg under his hands and of the heartbeat he had matched his to. He thought of the other's sword crusting over with lace and of the men who would hate him for not being the thing they had wanted him to be, and he thought of his oath, and he thought of the door, and he thought of what walks through a door if you set it open without a guard. "Tell me we did right," Ygritte said, stepping up to stand at his right, very close. She looked strange inside the wall, a red thing in a white place, a creature a child might draw when a child wants to be brave and has only one crayon. "We did what we could," he said, "because sometimes that is the only poem you can offer." "Close enough to write to sleep," she said, and leaned into his shoulder and made the dragon hiss and lift his head and then settle again. He could feel it, even then, before any raven could carry it south, before any lord could turn the story into a knife. The world had shifted its weight. A white dragon hatched in the wrong country and decided to breathe the right-wrong fire. Old spells woke. Old enemies took interest. New friends made themselves out of old lies. He stood in the center of a narrow bridge spun over an old abyss and felt it quiver under the weight of the armies behind him and before him, and he kept his balance, because that is what is asked of those who stand on walls. Ghostwing turned his pale eye to the north and his pale other eye to the south, and his breath smoked. And Jon felt the hum in his bones again and put his hand up, and the dragon pressed his skull into that palm, and Ghost pressed his flanks into Jon's calf on the other side, as if he, too, would put his weight into the balance, and the day moved, and the wind shifted, and the sound of the wall's long, slow sleep became for a breath something like a sigh.